Have you ever walked through an antique shop? A place where the past exists, where dust isn't just dust, but a covering over untold stories. A place where every item has a soul, a secret. But what about a secret so dark that no one wants to find it? This is the story of David. David isn't a detective. He isn't a journalist. David is just an ordinary man with an unusual hobby. He collects strange-looking items, especially those with a mysterious history. One day, while wandering the cobblestone streets of New Orleans, David saw a small antique shop tucked away behind a bakery. Its sign was faded, unreadable. The window glass was dusty, but one item inside caught his eye. It was an old, worn, and faded oak box with an oxidized brass lock. David went inside. The shop was full, almost overflowing. The smell of damp wood and old dust mingled together. The owner, an elderly man with sad eyes and thinning gray hair, was sitting behind the counter, reading an old leather-bound book. "Looking for something, son?" he asked, his voice hoarse. David pointed to the oak box. "That box," he said. "It looks special." The old man looked up. A bitter smile crossed his face. "Special, huh? Yes, it is. That box holds a story you won't want to know." David was intrigued. He was used to such words, but this was something else. It wasn't a sales pitch. It was a warning. "I still want to see it," David said. As the owner handed him the box, David noticed an unusual dent on the lid. "What caused this?" he asked. The man shook his head. "No one knows. That box has been here for 30 years. Came from a young woman," she said. "To keep it until someone brave enough to open it came along." As David paid for the box, the owner whispered, "Be careful." David took the box home, his heart pounding. He put it on the table, trying to open the stuck brass lock. After several attempts, it clicked open with a small, echoing sound in the silence. David opened the lid. Inside, there was no gold or jewels, only an old, yellowed letter. It was sealed with a broken red wax seal. What puzzled David was a dark, dried stain on the corner of the letter. A stain he knew. Blood. David opened the letter, his hands trembling. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. He began to read. "To whoever finds this, if you are reading this, I'm afraid it's too late for me. My name is Elizabeth. I was deceived. He is not who I thought he was. He is a monster. He took everything from me. And he won't stop until he takes my life too." David held his breath. Her words were heartbreaking, so desperate. She wrote about a man she loved, a man who seemed perfect, but gradually, she noticed unusual things. His unexplained absences at night, mysterious scars on his body, his sudden mood swings. Everything got worse after she discovered something. She didn't write it down, but she mentioned an old case he was involved in. David turned the letter over. There was a hand-drawn map on the back. It wasn't a street map. It was a map of somewhere, a place where David could see red ink X marks. What did he do here? He wondered. David stared at the letter, at the dried bloodstain. A cold feeling ran down his spine. Elizabeth was gone, and it seemed David had just found the answer to that mystery. David couldn't take his eyes off the words. Each letter was written as if it was screaming for attention, telling a story of betrayal and fear. He reread the letter once more, word for word, trying to grasp every small detail. Elizabeth, a young woman, was likely caught up in something beyond her control. She loved a man whom she thought was perfect, a Prince Charming, who became a devil in disguise. This story wasn't just a letter about a broken heart. It was a desperate cry for help, a frantic confession. David stared at the map. It had no names, no annotations, only trails, abstract lines, and a few small crosses. He noticed a specific path, one that led to an old warehouse. He recognized it. It was an abandoned building on the outskirts of town that he had seen while driving. What did that mean? David started searching for information about Elizabeth and the man in the letter. He searched online and in old newspapers, but nothing. It was as if they had never existed. This only deepened the mystery. David decided to look for the old man in the antique shop. Maybe he knew more than he let on. When David returned to the shop, it was closed. A small sign on the glass window read, "Permanently closed." This was highly unusual. Just the day before, the owner had been there. What had happened? David felt like he was being watched, a cold sense of unease creeping into his heart. He hurried away from the shop, back to his apartment. He locked the door, drew the curtains. The light from the single lamp on his table fell on the old letter. He stared at the map again. Maybe the crosses weren't just markers on a map. Maybe they were burial sites, a burial ground for deadly secrets. David's sense of unease grew. He wasn't alone anymore. A dark, invisible shadow was stalking him. His ordinary life had been shattered, and all because of a blood-stained letter. David tried to push his thoughts aside, but Elizabeth's words kept replaying in his mind. "He is a monster. He won't stop until he takes my life too." That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept staring at the oak box, at the broken brass lock. The map in the letter haunted him. He knew what he had to do. He had to go to the old warehouse. The next morning, David drove to the outskirts. It was an abandoned area, a place where time seemed to have stood still. Dilapidated buildings, rusty old cars, and an eerie silence. The old warehouse was at the end of the road, an old brick building with broken windows and a rotting wooden door. David got out of his car, his heart pounding. He looked around, a cold feeling running down his spine. No one, no sound. Only the wind whistling through the empty window frames. He pushed the wooden door. It let out a long, grating creak, echoing in the empty space of the warehouse. Inside, everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Light filtered through the broken windows, creating faint streaks on the floor. David opened the letter, looking at the map. He followed the marked trail, a path that led to a secluded corner of the warehouse. There, he saw an old, rotting ladder leaning against the wall. David climbed the ladder to a small loft. In the loft, David found an old trunk. It wasn't locked. He opened it. Inside were an old leather-bound notebook, a few faded photos, and a silver ring. David picked up the notebook. It was Elizabeth's diary. He began to read. The words in the diary were filled with emotions, from passionate love to ultimate fear. She wrote about the man whose name was Robert. Robert was an archaeologist, a charming and mysterious man. But gradually, Elizabeth realized a horrifying truth. Robert wasn't an archaeologist. He was a grave robber. In the diary, Elizabeth recounted how she discovered a box buried in an old cemetery. It was the oak box. Robert wanted to kill her to keep the box's secret. She escaped but had nowhere to go. She knew he would find her. David looked at the photos. There was one of Elizabeth and Robert. Elizabeth was a beautiful woman, with curly auburn hair and blue eyes. Robert was the opposite, a man with a gaunt face and cold eyes. No love, no warmth, just an emptiness. David stared at the photo, a feeling of horror enveloping him. He recognized Robert. He was the antique shop owner. David remembered his words. "That box holds a story you won't want to know." He had warned him. A sound echoed from below. David held his breath. Someone had entered the warehouse. "David!" A hoarse voice called. "I know you're up there." It was Robert's voice. David looked around. No escape. He was trapped. He grabbed Elizabeth's diary and the photos, stuffing them into his pocket. The loft door burst open. Standing there was Robert with a twisted smile. "Such a curious man," Robert said, his voice full of sarcasm. "I told you not to be curious, but you didn't listen." "You killed Elizabeth?" David asked, his voice trembling. Robert laughed, a cold, joyless laugh. "She knew too much," he said. "Just like you do now." David backed away, trying to find a way out. But Robert had blocked the way. He held an axe in his hand, his eyes wild. "You know, I've been waiting for someone curious enough to open that box. And now you will pay for your curiosity." Robert lunged at David. David dodged the first blow, but the next one sent him tumbling down. Elizabeth's diary fell out of his pocket, onto the floor. David saw one last line written in blood on the last page. David tried to get up, but Robert was too fast. He grabbed David's collar, lifting him up. His wild eyes looked straight into David's. "Elizabeth tried to save me," he said, "but she failed, and so will you." He threw David to the floor. The axe fell beside him. David looked at the diary at the last line. "He killed her. I saw him." It was Elizabeth's last line, written in her blood. Robert had killed her right in this warehouse. David quickly grabbed the axe, aiming it at Robert. But Robert reacted faster. He kicked the axe and it flew into the wall with a loud crash. Robert laughed, a sinister laugh. "You can't kill me," he said. "No one can kill me." David was cornered with nowhere to run. He looked at Robert at his wild eyes. He wasn't a man. He was a monster. "I won't die," David said, a desperate feeling surging through him. "I won't die." David's words, though weak, were like a small flame in a night of hopelessness. Robert stopped, a look of surprise crossing his face. He was used to pleas and begging, not defiance. "Not die?" Robert asked, a sneer on his face. "Everyone dies." He advanced, one step at a time, his old shoes echoing in the empty space of the warehouse. David backed away until his back hit the wall. Elizabeth's map fell out of his jacket pocket and landed on the floor. Robert saw it. A horrifying change came over his face. The madness in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a look of fear. "You found it?" he whispered, his voice no longer arrogant, but filled with dread. "What is it?" David asked, trying to grasp Robert's change. "It's the key," Robert said. "The key to everything." He bent down, picked up the map, and stared at the red X marks. She marked everything. Robert began to tell the story, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to. Like a river breaking its dam, all the secrets he had hidden for 30 years came pouring out. Robert wasn't a grave robber. He was a member of a secret cult, the Black Sun Cult. The cult believed there was an eternal power hidden in ancient artifacts. And to obtain that power, they had to sacrifice a pure soul on the day of the sun's rise. And Elizabeth, the woman Robert loved, was that pure soul. "I loved her," Robert said, his voice full of pain. "But I had to sacrifice her. It was our destiny." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. Robert killed the woman he loved, just for a crazy belief? "You're a monster," David said, his voice full of fury. Robert shook his head. "No, I'm not a monster. I'm a man who was trapped, just like she was." He pointed to the oak box. "That box isn't a place to hold a secret. It's a sealed box. It sealed her soul." David looked at the box, at the broken lock. A cold feeling ran down his spine. Elizabeth wasn't dead. Her soul was sealed in that box. "And you sold it," David said. "You sold her soul." "No," Robert said. "I gave it to a man who could keep it safe, a man I trusted. But he sold it." He looked up, his eyes full of tears. "I tried to protect her, but I failed." David realized that man wasn't the antique shop owner. It was someone else, someone Robert had trusted. And he had betrayed Robert, selling the box to the antique shop owner. "And the antique shop owner gave it to me," David said. "He knew everything." Robert nodded. "He tried to save her, but he was too weak. He thought you could do it." David looked at Robert. He was no longer a ruthless killer. He was a tormented man, trapped between love and destiny. "So, why did you want to kill me?" David asked. "Because I was afraid," Robert said. "I was afraid you would do something to her soul. The power of the Black Sun Cult is uncontrollable. It will destroy everything." David didn't believe any of that. He thought Robert was just trying to justify his actions. But then he looked at the map. There was a red cross, marked in a specific location. A location he recognized, the ancient cemetery. David looked at Robert. A feeling of ultimate fear surged through him. "Your cult?" "They're there," David said, his voice trembling. Robert nodded. "They're waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for her soul to return." And when it does, they will have the eternal power. David felt like he was caught in a nightmare he couldn't escape. He looked at Robert, at the man who had been destroyed by love and destiny. "What do we do?" David asked. "What do we do to stop them?" Robert looked at him, his eyes filled with hope and despair. "We have to go there," he said. "We have to stop them before it's too late." David and Robert ran out of the warehouse, without a word. They drove to the ancient cemetery, a place David had only seen in his nightmares. The car's headlights shone on the gravestones, creating eerie shadows. When they arrived, they saw a group of people standing in the center of the cemetery, in a circle drawn in blood. They were chanting a chilling, repetitive sound. In the middle of the circle, a stone altar had been set up. "That's them," Robert whispered, his voice trembling. "The Black Sun cult." David and Robert hid behind a tombstone, watching them. David recognized one of them. He was a middle-aged man with a long beard and cold eyes. He was the one who had bought the box from Robert and sold it to the antique shop owner. "That's him," David said. "The man who betrayed you." Robert nodded. "His name is John. He is the leader of the cult." John raised his hand, and a young woman handed him a dagger. He placed it on the altar and began to chant a spell. A blue light emitted from the dagger. "They're summoning Elizabeth's soul," Robert said. "We have to stop them." Robert ran out of his hiding place, screaming, "Stop! Stop!" John turned, looking at Robert with a sneer. "I knew you would come," he said, "but you're too late." John chanted a final spell, and the blue light from the dagger became stronger. It shone directly into the center of the circle. A faint image began to appear, an image of a woman. It was Elizabeth. "Elizabeth!" Robert screamed. "No! No!" David ran out, grabbing the dagger. He aimed it at the altar, at the place where Elizabeth's soul was appearing. "I won't let you kill her again," David yelled. John turned, looking at David with furious eyes. He chanted a spell, and a black energy enveloped David. David felt like he was being squeezed. Robert lunged at John, attacking him. The two men fought while David tried to break free from the black energy. Finally, he succeeded. He ran to the altar, aimed at Elizabeth's soul, and plunged the dagger into it. A blood-curdling scream echoed, a scream not from Elizabeth, but from John. He fell, blood gushing from his chest. The black energy disappeared. David looked at the dagger, then at John. John was dead. "He killed himself," David said. Robert knelt beside Elizabeth, whose soul had vanished. "I failed," he said, his voice full of despair. "I couldn't save her." David placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. "No," he said. "You saved her. You stopped them. Her soul is free." Robert looked at David, his eyes filled with tears. "She will never be able to come back." David nodded. "But she's at peace. And that's all we can do." Robert and David left the cemetery, leaving behind the bodies and the secrets that had been buried for 30 years. Elizabeth's story was over, but David's story was just beginning. In the following days, David and Robert traveled everywhere, looking for the remaining members of the Black Sun cult. They were successful and the cult was destroyed. Robert found a little peace in his new life, a life without secrets, without guilt. And David became a different man. He was no longer an ordinary man with a strange hobby. He was a hero. He solved a 30-year mystery and saved a soul. And now, after telling you this story, I just want to say, life is full of mysteries. We can find them anywhere, even in an antique shop. But the important thing is that we must be brave enough to face them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on other thrilling and exciting stories. Goodbye and see you next time.